Coming up, Rich Hawes from DTV Digest is back, and we'll be looking at the Olivier Gruner film, Angel Town. So that's fun. We haven't talked about Gruner to that degree on the show before, so definitely a fun conversation that we have there. I think the opening of the episode is more just about kind of Gruner in general, and then we get into the movie from there. Then next week, the guys from Comeuppance are back. We're going to be looking at Dolph Lundgren Unsung 3. So this will be our third list of unsung Dolph movies there. So that'll be good. We haven't had Brett from Comeuppance on in a little while. Of course, last week we had Ty on his monthly stint when we talked about Dermot Mulroney. But Brett will be back as well, and that'll be next week. Then the week after, Chris Kavinsky from Bulletproof Action is back on, and we're going to be looking at The Sweeper, the PM Entertainment classic with C. Thomas Howell, action directed by Spiro Rosato. So it's a total fun time there. So look for that in 2 weeks. And then DTVC Extra is back this Thursday. We'll be looking at Star Treks 3 and 4. So interesting there, kind of thinking of, sort of how that conversation is going to go there. Because I think one of the things, of course, there's sort of that binary of good and bad with the Star Trek movies in particular, where it's like the odd-numbered movies, 1, 3, and 5 are the bad ones, and the even-numbered ones, 2, 4, and 6 are the good ones. I think with 3, I've got some other ways to kind of frame that one that's a little bit outside of that, odds are bad, evens are good dialogue there. So it'll be a little bit different than maybe what you're expecting with number 3, and of course 4 as well. And then 2 weeks after that, we will be looking at we'll kind of wrap that one up there, right, with 5 and 6. So I don't remember the last time I've seen 5, so it's going to be interesting. And I don't even know if I've ever seen 5 in its entirety before. I think I watched it and fell asleep or something for it. So that's going to be interesting to be talking about that one that way. So again, this week on Thursday, we'll have DTVC Extra Star Treks 3 and 4, and then 2 weeks after that, we'll look at 5 and 6. In terms of other projects that I've been associated with or helped out on or guested on, no podcasts that have been released again. I did record with John from After Movie Diner, so look for that After Movie Diner episode. But then also, speaking of Bulletproof with Chris Kavinsky, he invited me to contribute on the Sho Kazugi project that they did there, where we ranked the movies, Sho Kazugi's ninja movies, and then also did a blurb. So I did a blurb on Enter the Ninja. That was the one that I discussed there. So always fun to collaborate on those. Those are always a good time. So you can find that on the Bulletproof site. You can also on my Facebook page. I shared the link that Chris posted on Bulletproof for it, so you can find the link there as well on the Facebook page. Speaking of Sho Kazugi, this weekend our post will be 9 Deaths of the Ninja, a Sho Kazugi film that I haven't done yet, which I don't know how that one escaped, but it's just kind of one that just sort of slipped by that I never did. So I watched it to be able to do the the list, to make sure my list was where I wanted it to be, make sure I'd seen everything. It was the only one on the options that we had to rank that I hadn't seen yet. So it's like, okay, well, now I'm seeing it. Why don't I review it? And of course, Sho Kazugi's birthday's this week. That's part of why Chris wanted to do that for Bulletproof, was to celebrate his birthday. So I'm going to have this post kind of in a similar way. It'll be kind of like a belated birthday post for him. But that'll be this weekend. That'll be Saturday. The Gardener, Gary Daniels, I've finally seen that one. So look for that one in 2 weeks' time. Finally making The Gardener happen. And then in 3 weeks, I've got Top Gunner listed as the next one up. I may stick with that one. There's the other one was Star Slammer, a Fred Olen Ray movie. So I'm kind of back and forth on which of those two will come next. So just sort of watch the space and see what happens there. I think that is everything. So a very quick opening we have this episode here. So what we will do is have John Cross at After Movie Diner and Miscellaneous Plumbing Fixtures play in our theme song here. And then when we come back, Rich Hawes from DTV Digest will be on, and we'll be looking at Angel Town.
All right, we are back at welcome back to the Direct to Video Connoisseur podcast. As always, this is Matt, and welcome back, Rich Hawes from DTV Digest. Welcome back, Rich.
Thanks for having me again, Matt. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. I always have trouble. Sometimes I have trouble with those introductions. I think I welcomed you back 3 times in one sentence there. So, yeah, no worries. Oh yeah, so it's I'm happy to have you on here because I think it's gonna be an interesting podcast episode, and that we're gonna be talking about kind of someone who's a little further down the list of stars here with Olivier Gruner, who I don't know if we've done an Olivier Gruner film per se on here. I know Ty from Columbus one time we did Gunfight at Rio Bravo, which was an Alexander Nevsky film that had Gruner in it, but I don't know if we've done an actual Gruner film. So yeah, I'm kind of curious what your thoughts, Rich, are when you hear somebody mention Olivier Gruner.
Oh yeah, there's a few of my favorite like top tier DTV action films are Olivier Gruner's from like the mid 90s. So Savage and Automatic. Nemesis is the kind of the go-to one, but yeah, Savage is one of my all-time favorites.
Yeah, funny about Savage, I don't think I've ever seen Savage. I think the problem with that, I think the thing that happened with Savage, because yeah, I think if I go to the critic reviews, because that's how I know if I've seen a movie now. It's been like so long with the podcast and everything, is that if I see my name, and yeah, I don't see myself as one of the critic reviews for that one. I think what happened was I confused it with Savat and
But she's
thought
also
I right. They're both in 95, right? Or Sabat's 95, Savage is 96. Like they're right next to each other
yeah.
on IMDb. And I think I confused the two on Netflix and thought, well, I don't need to see that movie. I've already seen it before, when actually that wasn't the case.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy that he made two films that like one letter apart. It's so similar. But yeah, Savage, I highly recommend it. It's kind of a Terminator, Tarzan kind of futuristic thing with a bit of close encounter. It's got all sorts in it. It's I think it's great fun. I say very much a kind of a Terminator, but his character is more like a Tarzan kind of character. So Tarzan in Manhattan, but with an edge is what I'm going for with that explanation of so that's a favorite. And Automatic, which is another one where he plays an android, which has got what's his I can't remember his name. The anyway, John Glover. Sorry,
John Glover.
John Glover
Yes,
is in that film as basically there's RoboCop elements with kind of the. I don't know if you remember, John Glover was in RoboCop 2 doing what like the opening fake advert for like for one of the systems or something, the satirical ads, and then basically Automatic is kind of building on that. So there's a little bit of the sort of advertising thing in there, but and he's kind of almost like the mad scientist sort of CEO kind of character who's in there. So he's really good. But Olivier Gruner is delivering really solid action in a sort of say quite a constrained budget, constrained environment. But for the time, I think those films had a bigger budget than we would ever expect to see something made with today. So Nemesis obviously is it's got some really great stuff in that. Albert Pune had probably one of the biggest budgets he ever had, and it's got a really fantastic cast, including a young Thomas Jane. So yeah, I think that was a really great time for Olivier Gruner, and as things went on, he kind of got pushed out, because the Jean-Claude Van Damme's and stuff then sort of enter the DTV space. But I've always had a real soft spot for Gruner, and I followed his careers, and when his films actually have become really hard to get hold of because he started working on really, really low budget stuff, which was really hard to find. But I'm slowly trying to find my way to catch up with it. What about your experience with Gruner?
Yeah, it's almost identical. And it is interesting, like what you mentioned, because the movies, obviously, like I said, I haven't seen Savage yet out of that kind of like that early to mid 90s period for him. But if you tack on Mercenary, right, which he does with John Ritter of all people, started that one with him.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like his first 6 movies are really, really fantastic, but they're like you said, they're in that window of time where, you read about his story, about Gruner's story, and apparently like he was in special forces in the French military, then does a has his kickboxing career, and then decides almost kind of similar to Gary Daniels, right? Where it's like late
Yeah.
80s, early 90s. I'm just going to see if I can make this movie thing work. And so, Gary Daniels, I think he just went to Los Angeles and then the Philippines and was like, hey, can somebody put me in a movie? And Gruner was like, he just went to Cannes, right? And somebody like cast him in the movie we're going to be talking about, Angel Town. Uh, it's like there was that boom where it was like with Van Damme and Seagal being so big, it was like everybody wanted their versions of Van Damme and Seagal, and it's like Corman claimed Don the Dragon Wilson, and so it was like everybody's
Yep.
kind of scrambling to get their next one, and that's where Gruner comes in, and like you said, once the market kind of falls out for Van Damme and Seagal, it was like once they started pushing names down, Gruner was one who got pushed really far down.
Yeah. Well, because when you got someone like Gruner who's like the B movie Van Damme, and then Van Damme becomes the B movie Van Damme, there's no place for him to go. So that sort of the bottom falls out a little bit. But he'd established such a reputation that he has been able to keep his career going. He's even he's back with Jalal Murhai's The Circuit follow-ups. I think some of them are coming out this year because they were originally turning The Circuit into a TV series, which to me just seemed like a crazy idea because who has been asking for that? How are they going to sell it? And I think they realized that they couldn't sell it, so they've re-edited the series into 3 or 4 new movies. The first one, which is The Circuit 4, doesn't have Gruner in. That's focusing on Billy Blanks, but Dirk Longstreet will be back in The Circuit 5. So he was in the first 3. He's going to be back for the 5th one. It's going to be really interesting to see how those films come together. Say, originally having been conceived as a multi-episode, potentially syndicated TV show, into these sort of packaged, films. So but he's been, he's still around, doing lots of stuff. He's very active on social media, and I think he does like training courses and things like that. So, all building on his martial arts experience and say special forces experience as well.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, if you like, especially his Wikipedia page, it kind of goes into those different things he's got going. Where it's like like I said, you get training videos. He does private security work for other celebrities. All of that kind of stuff. But like you said, the circuit. It's interesting. So your background on the circuit actually really helps because I was wondering, like, when you go to the circuit page, the TV series for the circuit page, when they talk about like, see also or more like this. The Circuit 4, they mentioned the Circuit 4, and so I wasn't sure if maybe because I've heard some stories about Gruner not being the easiest to work with, and I wasn't sure if maybe he and Murhai had a falling out, and Murhai's like, all right, forget this, I'm just gonna do the Circuit without you. But that actually kind of makes more sense that they packaged it into movies and they're coming soon, and so number 4. Which I guess number 4 is slated to come out this year, I think. That's the date
Yeah.
they put on it. Yeah. So I'm happier to find out that that's really the case, is that they're just packaging these things in movies. And I feel like if anybody's going to be able to package these things into movies, Murhai is the one who's going to sort of make lemonade out of those lemons.
Yeah. Talking of TV, another thing I used to watch because Olivier Gruner was in it was a Canadian show called Codename Eternity. I don't know if you ever caught that one. It had Cameron Bancroft in it. So Olivier Gruner was in a supporting role, but quite a key supporting role. It was quite high profile for what it was,
Yeah, that one I don't know. I've ever, let me take
like a
because
sci-fi show.
yeah, because there's a lot of times with those Canadian shows. Okay, so this one looks familiar. Because with those sci-fi shows, and this would have actually been like right around that time period. The Canadian sci-fi shows were always repackaged in America as syndicated shows. And so Yeah, this one, I think this is one that I saw advertised, but I never actually saw an episode of it. So it would be interesting to kind of track it down. I know we have Andrew Babcock, who's on Instagram, who's always seems to be able to track down these TV shows. He's always posting, and it's always like I'm always kind of jealous of some of the ones that he finds, and I wonder if he's found this one yet.
Uh, yeah, and I think there's some episodes on like YouTube and stuff that you can find, but yeah, whether it's, I mean, I think it was released on DVD, so people are probably ripping that and putting it on various services or whatever, because I presume it must be out of print now. But the yeah, well, and the other thing going back to Gruner's other films that I've seen. So he did some stuff with Lloyd Simandl,
Hmm.
the who always made those. I think you and Ty have talked about some of his stuff where it's the mixing action stars with sleaze,
Right.
women in prison and all that sort of stuff. And Olivier Gruner did one, I think it was called Deadly Engagement, which kind of tried to combine the semi-naked women in a prison environment with Olivier Gruner, but I don't know whether he was going to rescue them or something. There was what was his name? Jack Scalia. He did one of them as well. One of these Lloyd Simandl films with essentially the same kind of mix. I think it was Hell Mountain or something like that. It was called, and I just remember it being a really odd mix of, yeah, we're gonna make it a film that sort of ostensibly is an action movie, but then it's actually a sort of a bit of a sleazy sexploitation film as well. And yeah, so Olivier Gruner was working with him a bit. And one of the films they did together was Crackerjack 3.
That I hadn't
And
seen yet.
now that's a weird one because that's pretty much unrelated to the first two Crackerjack movies, and it's kind of an old sort of an Expendables-ish kind of thing of here's a bunch of old guys who used to work with, or Space Cowboys, the Clint Eastwood movie or something like that. So you got a bunch of retired special forces guys and spies, I think, and they're on they're trying to track something down. It's all got something to do with garden gnomes, from what I recall. I just remember it being really. I don't know if it was supposed to be funny, but it was. I remember it being quite amusing. I think Bo Svensson was in it. I keep meaning to watch it again because it's almost like one of those films I can't believe it exists. But then again, this is a sequel to Crackerjack. Crackerjack 2 has got its own reputation, but I think Crackerjack 3 is possibly in the same realm. And I'm pretty sure, that Olivier Gruner was definitely in that. I think he was the villain, but I'm not 100% sure. But yeah, he was making, once he got away out of that sort of early to mid 90s period of Savage, Mercenary and stuff, then we kind of move on to Mars. There was a film he made called Mars. I remember that coming out, and they dubbed his voice. He didn't have his own voice in that one, unfortunately. But then he did things like Mercenary 2, which is classified as a TV movie, which I think is quite interesting. I'm not sure whether it actually was premiered on like cable or something, but yeah, I remember that. I remember when that came out, and then there was Velocity Trap, a sci-fi movie. But once you get out of the, things really slowed down. Once you get out of the 90s, the films were, and this is where the circuit and stuff comes in, and things like Extreme Honor, which I have also seen, which is I think we've mentioned this one before with was it Dan Anderson? Is it Dan Anderson? His name?
Yes.
You guys have referred to him as the pork roast.
With a 300-pound pork roast. Yeah. So listeners of
what is that? What is the 300-pound pork roast reference? Because I don't get it.
So it started with I don't know if you've ever seen a Mystery Science Theater 3000 when they riffed the movie Space Mutiny with Reb Brown.
Oh, yeah, I haven't seen it, but yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So at the end, so actually the woman who ends up being Reb Brown's wife, I think they met on this. I don't know if it was that movie they met on the set of, but they subsequently were married, but they were playing, characters. He was the male lead and she was the female lead. And at the end, he's like carrying her off, kind of off frame. And one of the jokes is they got married and had a she gave birth to a 20-pound pork roast. That was the joke. And so I started kind of referring to these beefy characters as pork roasts. I can't remember. There's another review I did where there was a guy who had like kind of a poodle mullet, but he was also a big beefy guy, and I was like saying how I was like a poodle mullet crossed with a pork roast. But then, yeah, Dan Anderson, I thought of him as 300-pound pork roast. But part of it was just that I was so angry at the bait and switch on that movie. And it's not Dan Anderson's fault, of course, that the filmmakers were like, well, we can't sell Dan Anderson, so we've got to put Gruner and Mike, Michael Ironside, Michael Madsen, and people like that on the cover. Those, but I was so mad. I said, you're selling me a 300-pound pork roast, or whatever. Like that's what the movie should be, and it just sort of became this thing. I have noticed that in the States here on Tubi, the new version, the new thumbnails that they use for that movie, for Extreme Honor, they have Dan Anderson in them. So I don't know if that review became so infamous that they were like, all right, we've got to put Anderson on the cover, otherwise it looks bad. I don't know.
Just as a side note, he's never done anything else as far as I recall. Because I wrote because when that film came out, I got it because I was a Gruner fan. I watched it. I thought it was quite interesting. This guy I've never heard of. And I did this blog post for a blog I used to write like 15 years ago about guys who basically only made one or a handful of movies. And Dan Anderson is one of the ones who literally only made the one, and he is the star of that film. And he's got quite a good cast around him. It's a bit like well, these kind of things do happen, but you do wonder where they got him from, and I didn't know whether he had a background in like sports or something. And I'll be honest, I've not looked at my article. Maybe I can't remember whether I managed to find anything at the time, but I think information was pretty scant then. But yeah, so Olivier Gruner was appearing in stuff like that, and there was stuff like Crooked with Don, also called Soft Target, with Don the Dragon, which I haven't had a chance to see. SWAT Warhead 1, I've been wanting to see. Lost Warrior, Left Behind, I've never been able to find that. Interestingly, there was one, he made a Polish movie called Skorumpowanie, which I've always, because I'm interested in Polish films, I've always wanted to find it, and it's been really hard. I eventually found it. Was available. I think it might be on Tubi and stuff, but it got released as it's called. I think they called it The Corrupted, and as you might expect, Olivier Gruner is there front and center, even though I'm pretty sure he only has a small supporting role.
Right.
But yeah, and that's turned up on. It's actually available in the UK now, so I will be. I think I found it on like Prime or something. So I'll definitely be checking that out soon as well. I've always wanted to see that. And there's other films, say, that are on Tubi. I think they're on Tubi. Films like Assassin X, and Regenerator, which I don't know about you, or Sector 4 Extraction. I'm not sure if that's on there. All these films are just really hard in terms of in the UK. Really hard to find any of these things. So it's almost like Gruner's market completely fell away at the turn of the millennium. So hardly any of his films have been released here. I think Soft Target is one of the only ones, as following things like Deadly Engagement and stuff that's actually available. So how familiar are you with the more recent, as let's say the last 15, 20 years of Olivier Gruner's films?
So interesting you mentioned Sector 4 Extraction, because that one was on something called the Roku channel, I guess. I don't know if you have the Roku channel in England. Yeah. So it was on there for a little bit. That's how I ended up catching it. Now the screenwriter of that film is Richard Pierce, which I don't know if you see him on Instagram at all, because right now he currently writes movies like either like Tubi originals or movies that are kind of like the Lifetime movies that are Kidnapped at the Prom, those kinds of movies, which are kind of a lot of fun. But he was talking to me about, actually he did a podcast episode with us when he was doing Sector 4 Extraction, when that was being made, and that episode was lost because my early 2014 ones were all lost. But apparently it wasn't the best time making this movie with Gruner. That was for Pierce. Just to go into strictly what he has said, what I've seen him say is that he was on Twitter and he said something to the effect of a has-been action star said I'll never make it in this business as a writer, and of course I've got all these credits to my name now. And then the Sector 4 extraction thing came out, and he was like, "Yeah, Gruner was the guy." So I was like, "Okay," because I don't want beyond speculating, right? He said it, not me. That they had trouble working with him, but also Outlaw Vern covered Sector 4 extraction, and his criticisms were legitimate of the movie. Like there's scenes that are just so dark that you can't see what's happening. They're just not well lit, and things like that happen in the movie. And he mentioned those things, and we think Gruner got into the comments and because I was looking up Angel Town just to kind of see who else has reviewed it, because a lot of people have covered Angel Town, and I saw that Outlaw Vern had covered it, and he's like, I don't think Gruner's a big fan of me, with a link, and I clicked on the link and it was the Sector 4 extraction one where he was like saying something effective like you people just go drink your Starbucks and don't know anything about making movies, which is always interesting, right, when the filmmaker gets their back up about it. I guess my review, I think it's been so long since the movie came out that I think Gruner's probably far enough away from the film that he wouldn't be looking for my review, which I didn't kill the movie, but I reviewed it about last year, I think, or a couple of years ago, I think. I don't remember actually. That's a good when I reviewed it, but I want to say it was recently. 2020 actually. It's 2020 I did it, so it's actually about 4 years ago now. But I just said it was like you can decide whether you think it's a vanity project or a passion project, but it kind of straddles that line, and whether you like it or not. But I mean, but I guess I didn't kill it enough that he would go in the comments on my page and be like, but also maybe it's far enough from it. But yeah, so I think from your standpoint, as a fan of these kinds of movies, I think you should watch Sector 4 Extraction just to say you've seen it. It's on Stars here in the U.S. though, and I guess it's available to rent on Amazon in the U.S. I don't know if it is in the U.K., but I think you should see it just to say you've seen it.
Yeah, definitely. If I can ever sort of track it down or whatever, I will definitely try and watch it, because I really want to catch up on all these Gruner films. Just as a because I want to complete the journey, as it were.
Yeah.
And let's say I've had so much difficulty. It's not just his movies, but a lot of other people's they became these. Frank Zagarino is another one. He's made a whole bunch of stuff, like the whole Airboss series has never been made available in the UK, and I've never had a chance to catch up on all those sort of things. So very much something that I do want to get to, but I'd say Gruner had such a great run, I think, in that sort of early period, starting with this film. I think he had a really good solid run. He was there at the right time. He was one of the right guys, and and he managed to work with some really good people, I think.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, obviously, you work with Pion. He's worked with Art Camacho, multiple films. He didn't do a PM film, which is interesting, right? If you look at the timing, but I guess it's because he signed with Imperial, and I don't know if it was an exclusive contract with them that would have precluded him from doing any PM stuff, but or maybe I guess by the time he would have, because if you look at his timing, right, it's like probably by the late '90s. It would have been kind of like, after he's done a few of these movies, he's probably too late for PM, right? Because you think of like Recoil was like 96, 97. That's about when Mars comes out. But, he did, like you said, he's worked with a lot of he worked with Isaac Florentine. We talked about Pion, Art Camacho. So he's worked with a lot of big names. And of course, the director of this film, Eric Carson, has he did Black Eagle, produced Lionheart. So like you said, definitely some heavy hitters in the action realm.
Yeah, it was kind of the Imperial, the Shahs, he was kind of coming in through that time, and then he working with people like Avi Nesher, with did the that's who he did the Savage with, and Mercenary and stuff. So I think which was kind of and Mars, he did a whole bunch with Nesher instead of, like you say, instead of going over in the PM direction. Patrick Highsmith was the pseudonym that Nesher used to use on a lot of his movies. So I always knew him as Patrick Highsmith. I had no idea until recent years that it was the same guy. He did Automatic. Say a whole bunch, all of this, Automatic, Savage, the Mercenary films, Mars. He was doing all those with Gruner, and then say that's kind of, as you move away from that, 98, 99. PM's sort of scaling things back, and the industry, casting, is changing, priorities are changing. So I think that's where that's why I think that must be why the PM Gruner collaboration that we might expect actually never took place, because he was probably locked into a contract with Nesher.
Right. 'Cause, yeah, I think I think you're exactly right there. And that's why we never quite got that. By the time he would have been open for that, PM's wave would have crested. And I think, there are a few names, right, like that. Like Cynthia Rothrock did one film for PM, but I think at that time, right, she was locked into doing something with Stallone that never ended up happening.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that hurt her ability to do some of those. Obviously, Don the Dragon Wilson and Gary Daniels did do a lot of stuff with PM, and so some of the best stuff, right, that PM ever did with guys like like we did Recoil, on the last time you were on, we were talking about Spiro Rosatos, Chad Stahelski, Darren Prescott. I found out, I didn't realize that he also worked on Recoil, which he was doing the stunt coordinating work for the first John Wick, working with Stahelski. So
Right.
Yeah, it's kind of it was kind of a shame, I think, with guys like, because Daniels fell down just as much as Gruner did when the wave crested there. But it was nice to be able to see Gruner and Wilson work with those names when we unfortunately didn't get to see. Obviously Rothrock has her Hong Kong stuff, so I think that's fantastic. But yeah, it would have been interesting to see Gruner work with them.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah, no. Yeah, and I guess the other point I think that you make is a really fantastic one, and that is, like, once that wave crested, once we kind of the bottom fell out of action, that we've been kind of watching this happen for like probably a good 10 or 15 years now, that when the bottom fell out and suddenly you have names like Seagal and Van Damme kind of falling down into the DTV realm, you had kind of a shuffling of things, right? That you saw, like, for example, I mean, Cynthia Rothrock has done some movies that are almost impossible to find. I mean, one was this movie Hostage that I still can't remember exactly how I found it, but I'm the only one who's reviewed it on IMDb, like, because it's just so difficult to find. There's another one called Lost Bullet that's almost impossible. And if you go through her IMDb credits, a lot of her stuff has just never been released. That's been, recent stuff. Don the Dragon Wilson was supposed to do The Line, an RLS Frazier film. They decide, oh, hey, we can get Ray Liotta instead. So we're going to rewrite the part, write Don the Dragon Wilson out of it completely, and give the part to Ray Liotta, because it's like, oh, this is a big coup for us to get Ray Liotta. And he kind of ends up taking a hiatus from filmmaking because he was just so disillusioned by that. And then, you see like Gary Daniels, he was doing like Christian films in Thailand, stuff like that.
Yes.
So, Daniel Bernhardt's another great one where, because I think Bernhardt and Gruner kind of both fit that category of like a DTV version of Van Damme. And it's interesting how Bernhardt went full on stunt work, where he was doing like The Matrix and things like that. And it's almost kind of allowed him to have this sort of, I don't want to say a resurgence, but he's getting parts that none of the other ones are getting, where it's like a small part in John Wick, and then like a Jesse V. Johnson movie and that kind of stuff. So it's interesting the paths that these actors took. And Bernhardt seems to have been the one that almost, not kind of like Dolph, for example, but I think Bernhardt, out of this kind of lower tier here, did the best job of coming out of it all right.
Oh, he did, yeah, because he navigated himself away from the starring. He wasn't going to get the starring. He wasn't getting the starring roles anymore. He'd worked with, he'd done the Bloodsport movies, which is a weird guy, because he did the like Bloodsport 4 was like, which unrelated to the first two, so he's playing a different character. I think they just wanted to make a movie and slap the Bloodsport name on it, as far as I'm aware. But yeah, he was starting to work with really low budgets, and even though he'd worked with people like Sheldon Lettich, and did a film with Robert Englund with him, and but then say that the market changes, he kind of goes into the background, and then he gets this resurgence with working with, say, working with 8711. He's part of that whole thing coming up, and as a result, he's doing sort of more supporting roles and your sort of stunt and key training positions and stuff. But he's got that consistency of the work. He's one of the most well-known guys in the industry now, and a lot of people who know about him don't even realize that he was a DTV star doing things like True Vengeance and stuff back in the day, which I think also Chad Stahelski was working on, because that's where they know each other from, films like that. Yeah, now things like, we get Bernhardt's turning up, quite regularly now. It's not just say behind the scenes. He does. I mean, there were films like Parker where he fought Jason Statham, and then more recently we've had Chief of Station, the Jesse Johnson film where he's up against Aaron Eckhart. And yeah, he's very consistent. I think I would say he's a fan favorite, because I always enjoy seeing him. When he turned up in The Matrix, I thought that was great. I think it was was it the second one he turned up in?
Yeah,
Actually had a sort of small featured role.
Yeah, because I think
I got a massive kick out of that.
I know. I think it's like you, me, and like kind of our ecosystem. We were the only ones who watched that scene and were like, "Hey, that's awesome. That's Gary. That's Daniel Bernhardt." Like we were the ones recognizing him in that role. But because that whole sequence, I mean, that was like, the Wachowskis. I think they like created their own highway to do the chase sequences, and there's Bernhardt like on top of a rig or something, like fighting with other people on there. And of course it was kind of reminiscent of things like Recoil or Rage and stuff like that. But yeah, it was one of those things where it was like, I'm telling some of my friends like, hey, that's Daniel Bernhardt, and they're like, I don't know who you're talking about. I don't know who that is. And so, but it was like you said, it was really cool to see.
Yeah. And Gruner I think Gruner could have gone that way. He could have become a sort of background stunt guy, but I think he wanted to be, wanted to retain that, star presence. And he's tried to do that instead of, say, like talking about like Sector 4 and like directing his own projects.
Yeah.
Eventually. But so I can't attest to any of them, because I haven't actually been able to lay my hand. There's one called Executive Protection as well. Looks quite interesting. But so yeah, it's like well, let's wind it back now, and let's go to Angel Town, shall we? I think that's if you don't mind me steering the conversation in that direction.
Yeah, because we've kind of gone to the end of like the current time of Gruner's career, whereas this was the original, right? This was Angel Town was his first movie, the first movie that he ever made. It came out in 1990, which I think it tracks really well with like the explosion of Van Damme and Seagal at the same time that you've got like again like Corman. I think was it 89 that we get the first Blood Fist, or yeah, the first Blood Fist I think was around that time. So there was a scramble from a lot of these B movie areas to get their next guy. I mean, Dudikoff, right? He was big with Cannon for the ninja movies. Everybody wanted their guy, and Imperial thought that Gruner was going to be their guy, and Angel Town was that first movie that they made with him. So it's a fascinating one, because when you think of like the first movies of some of these, I guess like Don the Dragon Wilson's first one, it's a really interesting one. Is a movie called New York Chinatown, where he plays a baddie. It's kind of an interesting one. But then you've got like Daniels, right, with either Final Reprisal or Secret of King Mahi's Island. Going back and seeing those first movies and kind of seeing the potential and the start there. Angel Town is a little bit unique in that, because it's like kind of a bigger production, I think, than some of those.
Well, and also Gruner is front and center in his first role, which again was not something that was common for the guys you were just talking about. And there were only really people like Steven Seagal who were basically being plucked out of obscurity and put in a lead. I know we talked about other things like Dan Anderson in Extreme Honor and stuff in B movies and stuff. That's quite common. But this was a moderately budgeted, okay, home entertainment, probably did play some cinemas as well. It's a medium kind of low budget production, coming off of the back of your Bloodsport kickboxer kind of movies, definitely trying to harness that audience. And yeah, Gruner didn't do any bit parts. You know, he wasn't a background player or a key, you know, key nemesis who turns up at the end of something. He's the hero straight away in his first movie.
Yeah, and actually in the trivia, it says that this movie was developed as a Van Damme vehicle. And I have to assume, you know, at that time he was getting so many things, right? He was, you know, that this would have been one that maybe he would have turned down, or you know, or maybe it was too late for them to try to get it to him. And so it was like,
wasn't Lionheart an Imperial production as well?
Yeah, I think you're right. That's a good point. Yeah, so they probably thought this would be another thing that they could keep with him, but he had outgrown Imperial, right? Pretty quickly, and I guess they thought, oh, you know, Olivier Gruner could work in a pinch for as our own Van Damme.
Well, yeah, because you know that they share that sort of commonality. Okay, he's from France, but they're both French speakers. You know, Jean-Claude's from Belgium, but he is a French-speaking Belgian. As far as I'm aware, and yeah, he is. I'm pretty sure because he's been doing French movies lately, hasn't he? And say Olivier Gruner's French, and I think they just thought those guys are so close in similarities. You know, they've got similar skills, albeit Gruner is a bit of a more of a legitimate, you know, fighter because I believe he really is. You know, say he did have that special forces background, and I think. You know, the film presents him as like a champion kickboxer, which I think he was. I haven't checked his IMDb.
No, he was. Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know. That's a good question if he was actual, you know, champion or not, because I know he did compete and was successful as a kickboxer. So yes, he does. Yeah,
he did
85
silver medal winner.
Yeah, and in 85 he won the 75 kilogram championship. So yeah, so is it saying he won the championship or he won a silver medal? He won a silver medal at that championship. So yeah, so definitely was a kind of a bigger deal on that. And I guess he
whereas Van Damme was, you know, for all his, you know, presence and his star power and everything, he didn't have a competitive background to sort of sell, you know, the when all these, you know, like you know, Roger Corman when he was pushing Don Wilson and basically loads of the people who were in the Don Wilson movies, he would always put that they were champions of X, you know, whatever it is that the, you know, where they'd made, you know, made their reputation. And yeah, so Gruner has this really interesting background, really legitimate background for them to build on. He wasn't a guy who was originally out to be an actor or a star in the same way I think that Van Damme was. And say I'd love to look at. I know there's been interviews and stuff. I haven't actually caught up with any of that stuff of how did Gruner get picked to be the star of Angel Town. I don't know if you know.
Well, so what he said was what you know, the IMDb and Wikipedia says is that he went to Cannes in '87 and just had like posters of himself, kind of, you know, he kind of put them around Cannes to try to, you know, get somebody's attention. He got the attention of a producer, the one who was producing Angel Town, and he was invited to LA to do some screen tests, and that's when Angel Town, you know, Imperial signed him, and so that's kind of what it was. Is kind of, you know, one of those things where I think, you know, he probably saw the success that Van Damme was starting to have. I mean, '87 is a little early for Van Damme, but I guess, you know, it was enough of that time where, you know, and I guess he was also getting into bodybuilding too, with guys like Schwarzenegger. You know, he saw what Schwarzenegger was doing, that kind of thing, and just thought, hey, I could maybe do this. And yeah, he caught somebody's eye, and that was it. That kind of they you know, gave up the whole boxing thing and went into acting, kind of full throttle at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very fascinating thing. And so, you know, so with Angel Town, maybe what I'll do is I'll do a quick synopsis of it, and then we can kind of, you know, break it into pieces here. I mean, I think the basic premise is it's, you know, the stranger in a small town, right? It's your classic Western and everything like that. Gruner plays a young man who is going to America for graduate school. He gets there late. because he was hooking up with his girlfriend, and so he didn't get to America
Yeah,
on
who's
time.
stripped naked in a graveyard.
Exactly. So yeah, so the movie starts. He's in his graveyard talking to his old friend or dad or somebody like that. And this woman shows up in a fur coat, and he's talking about leaving to go to America. He finally he's excited. He's going to be successful, and she's like, she takes off her coat and says, "What am I supposed to do with this while you're gone?" He's like, "Well, let's just have sex in the graveyard." But because of that, he gets to America late, and all of the houses have been rented, so he ends up renting in the bad part of town. So essentially, I don't know, the barrio. So one of the things I should say, this is slightly based off because the school he goes to is Southern California University, which is similar to the University of USC or University of Southern California, which does actually have that sort of reputation. I don't know what it's like now, but I know like obviously like in the 90s, think about like the OJ situation and all of that. USC did abut some more impoverished neighborhoods that had gang issues, that had some of those problems, and were aggressively policed as well. And so they would have been pulling probably some things from that, where he's close to the university, only a few neighborhoods over, and suddenly you're in the bad part of town. So when he's staying at this place, it's actually the house is run by Teresa Saldana, who I didn't realize she's no longer with us. She passed away in 2016. She was on a show called The Commish. I don't know if you got that show in England.
Oh yeah,
it was
yeah,
Michael Chiklis.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah, so that was her. I mean, she was also in Raging Bull, but she's a widow with a young son, and her mother living there in that place, and she's taking him in as a boarder. Of course, when he moves in, the gangs don't like that, but also they've been trying to recruit his young son, and so when or her young son, and so they attack the house, they attack them, and it's up to Gruner to fight them off, and fortunately has a friend in town, played by Peter Kwong, who runs a dojo, and he's helping him out as well. So yeah, it's kind of and of course he kind of fights him off, but yeah, I mean I guess overall, Rich, what were your thoughts on Angel Town?
I thought yeah, I liked it. I mean, here's a question: had you seen it before?
Yeah, so I saw it way back when I reviewed it for the site, and I enjoyed it then. So Kenner from Movies in the Attic suggested it to me. He kind of got me into Gruner, I should say. I had not really been familiar with Gruner. He was seeing my blog, and he was emailing me and saying like, "Oh, you got to get into this guy Gruner. You got to check out the." And he kind of listed the movies that you brought up. So this one, Automatic, Savat, definitely the kind of the nemesis, your classic Gruner films.
Yeah, so for me, this one was a real sort of oversight in my formative years. So, but even though I was a Gruner fan and a fan of all these kind of movies, I never saw this one. I was always very aware of it. I knew I was all. I always, the poster's very distinctive. The box art. I remember seeing it, and for some reason, I just never got around to seeing it. So this is like really plugging a pretty significant gap for me to see this one, and I thought it was much more of a drama than I was expecting. So it's kind of it's kind of that action drama, like you say, guy who sort of helps take on the hoods, kind of Western kind of feel. But there was interesting things about the character in that at times he's not that likable, and he's like quite pushy and almost like trying to instigate violence where it's not really needed. He's kind of like, well, just get on with it. Avenge your father. What you're waiting for. Kind of like egging on this young kid and stuff. And some of it was like, well, hang on a minute there. But it wasn't like supportive. It was more like he was like, just look at you, but you're pathetic. You should be out there, being violent. But so yeah, it's interesting the way they sort of present the character of Jacques. The first thing, as it's his first role, his acting's a bit rough around the edges, and but I think he does as well as he probably could under the circumstances. And they sort of hold back the information about him being a champion kickboxer until, I don't know, half an hour, 40 minutes into the film when they sort of, or it felt that way anyway, maybe half an hour or 20 minutes. But they hold off to actually have him do some fight scenes, and then eventually say that when they go to the uh, sort of the dojo and they say, oh yeah, he's a champion, and they show all these posters and stuff. It's like, I think, oh, that's quite fun. I thought it was, but the so overall, I liked it. So it's quite long, a bit longer than I would generally like, but I think you do get interested in the story and you get interested in the characters. Just going to backtrack on a couple of the things that we talked about from this first sort of key intro part of the film. So the graveyard that he's at, which is supposed to be France, is pretty much obviously not France. You just have to catch sight of a couple of the gravestones to think, well, they've literally shot the whole thing in LA, probably. It's like there's nothing French about the location there, so that's quite fun. There's the montage of him going and trying to find a place to live. Quite a fun little, this was the montage is popular feature of films from the period. So yeah, so it's just one of him sort of going around trying to find a place. I quite like that. There's the offensive chairman of the university, who has like just a couple of scenes. I think he only appears in like maybe 3 scenes, but they introduce this guy who's very rude to everyone, basically, and racist and stuff. And that all culminates kind of with a scene where Jacques he arrives late for the gathering of the. I'm not sure if they're students or teachers or trainee teachers or what his position is there that he's supposed to be doing, but he's there, and they basically challenge him to. His mind's wandering off elsewhere, and they say, "Oh, can you solve this? What's wrong with this equation?" kind of thing. And as soon as they start snapping back in the room, and they think they're going to make fun of him, and he obviously he gets it all right, and they're impressed, and the crusty old dean is or chairman or whatever he is kind of not he's taken aback, but at the same time he's still not gonna accept it. It's like, oh, maybe he got it right, but I still believe I'm better than him. But not a lot happens with that. So yeah, there's fun scenes like that, and I liked his the way they sort of establish his character and his friendship, and the tensions that start happening, and but it's really when the sort of second part of the film kicks in with the gang and their attacks on the house and stuff, that things sort of really sort of edge up in sort of really build into the action quotient really increases at that point.
Yeah, exactly. Because you talked about with that dean, right? Because early on, right, like you said, there's that he goes to the school, he meets with I guess the president or somebody, and he says, oh, the dean wants to meet all of you or whatever. You got to come to a party at 7:30 at night. And I don't know of this necessarily, but I guess it's kind of this thing with all the new graduate students. They meet the dean and or the professor or whatever, and he essentially insults them. Like that's what the party is. But yeah, he goes, he realizes, the guy says, well, hey, if you have a place to stay, and he's like, oh, I'm gonna go look. And so the president doesn't seem to be all that concerned that he's gonna have trouble finding a place to stay. But he kind of hits the bricks. He kind of gets out on the pavement, and yeah, he has to keep getting further and further from the nice parts of town to this bad part of town where he finds the apartment that he's renting. And Teresa Saldana is there with her grandmother. Her grandmother presses his suit for him because he's going to this party, so he's got to wear his nice 80s suit, where it's the blazer and pants don't necessarily match, but they're not supposed to. And what I love about it is this whole thing of oh, I'm in a bad part of town. I'm going out at night, which is the worst thing you could do, but I'm just going to keep walking, right? Walking is fine with me as opposed to getting a cab or anything like that, which I guess cabs are expensive. But yeah, that's when he first runs afoul of the gang, right? When he goes to get the apartment, they tell him there's no apartment to rent here. They essentially try to scare him off. And he's like, well, I need a place to stay, so I'm going to stay here. And then when he gets out, and of course the gangs are very much Latin American stereotypes, which I think when TV Guide reviewed this, they were not fans of the way that or not TV Guide, the New York Times or LA Times, when they reviewed this movie, they thought the stereotypes were really bad. But I don't know, for me, I guess I wasn't as bad with it because I felt like everybody in the neighborhood were Latin American, of Latin American descent, and so you had the gangs that were bad, but you also had the people in the community that wanted to get rid of the gangs, and so I think if it was all like white people being terrorized by the Latin American gangs, I could see it being more of a concern. I don't know if that was an issue that you had with the movie.
No, I think I think this was a theme at the time, and also, like you say, I think if it was a if it was a white family, living in this community or whatever, you could see it more in racist terms. I think the balance is just about right in what they're doing, and also any of the characters who are shown to be racist are shown to be, which is the dean basically, is shown to be a fool. It's like so I certainly didn't have any concerns with that. I mean, sure, the representation is stereotypical, absolutely, of the time. Not as complex as maybe we would expect, but I don't think you'd see things a million miles away even now in terms of representations of gang culture. What's quite interesting is the film starts out, it's not got Olivier Gruner in the opening. The whole opening is like a montage sort of music video-ish kind of thing of the area, and I think it's Angel himself, the gang leader, who is driving around and watches a confrontation, which it's not really relevant to the rest of the film as far as I could see. I mean, I thought it was a really curious way to open the film. I mean, it establishes the gang violence, but not really anything more than that, unless I missed something. But it was kind of this is kind of the point where Angel and Angel's the leader. He's walking around with the Uzi. So I think he's basically the only one with a gun, or the only one with an Uzi anyway. And he's kind of dominating this group. It seems like because he's got this Uzi, and they've got they're trying to dominate the area, and Gruner's character basically exacerbates the situation, and causes more trouble, which is why his friend eventually sort of kind of is starting to get upset with him, because the escalation is in part down to Gruner, Jacques, and his friend's like, well, you're just going to run off like you did before. You're causing all these issues, but you're not going to be around to fix it. And there is a kind of a point where he does disappear from the film, and we wonder what's going to happen there. I mean, I think there's not really any doubt that he's going to return, but and there's quite a fun way that they do that, bringing him back into the film. But yeah, there's the whole meeting the kid and befriending. He kind of befriends the kid, but not really. It's not really as big brotherly as, it's kind of a big brotherly relationship, but in a sort of a mean way. he's not very nice to the kid. He's not very warm. He's not a warm character. So going back to what I was saying earlier, and so just sort of encouraging him to fight, and say spending time with his the house like gets attacked, and the boy and his mother have to go off, and the grandmother, stuff happens, and they go and stay with Lee at the gym, and this is where we get another montage of because we've had a couple of fight scenes that show his prowess and Jacques' prowess, and we get like a full-on what I was considering like a working off some steam kind of montage of him like fully getting into the ring and just really trying to batter some guys, and again say this is kind of an escalation that shows we've established this character and he's intellectual and he's a student, but there's more to him, and okay, this is the real him, this is the real fighter that's in him, and he's going to apply those skills in the out in the community when sort of things really start to escalate. Sorry, there's one more thing I want to say at this point, and that's there's this neighbor in the community who's in a wheelchair, and he is the guy from the um, convenience store scene in RoboCop, where he's just pumping the shotgun and shooting at RoboCop, basically saying expletives. He's just saying the same thing over and over again because he can't believe what he's facing. But yeah, it was nice to see him in a role, and that becomes quite a key supporting character in the film. And he's like, he's like really frustrated because he's in the wheelchair and he's just observing, and he really wants to, because he's a war veteran, he wants to help. And at one point, he literally drags himself into the neighboring house to sort of pick up his gun and stuff. And there was some fun stuff done with him.
Yeah, no, he was a great one as well. There's definitely some interesting characters here, but that was a really cool one because it was like you get this. He's one of those characters who wants to take the neighborhood back and almost sees Gruner as the agency through which he and the rest of the community can take their neighborhood back, which again I think is a little bit different from the sort of like the white knight element that you usually see in these movies, where it's like some white guy comes in and just saves the community. So yeah, definitely, I think you're right. Like, I think he was a really great character to sort of hedge against that normal trope or cliche that you usually see in this movie. It definitely hedged it a bit there for sure. Well, yeah, well, what we'll do here, why don't we take a quick break, and then we'll kind of wrap up, we'll kind of finish up our conversation on Angel Town. So yeah, we'll be right back.
It's the early 90s in LA. The war on drugs is raging, and Detective John Bainbridge is the LAPD's secret weapon against crime. Former Special Forces in Nam, he's a cop on the edge. When he and his partner Geary uncover a potential human trafficking ring, it doesn't take long before John Bainbridge realizes this thing goes all the way to the top, which doesn't scare him. That just means they'll fall that much harder when he takes them down. Part send-up and part love letter to early 90s action films, Bainbridge will take you back to the golden days of Canon, PM Entertainment, and AIP. You can get it in paperback or on Kindle and Kindle Unlimited from Amazon. Follow the link in the podcast description. My newest novel, Don's House in the Mountains, is available now. It follows Don Veazey, who after 20 years has finally made it as a writer, going from an AP English teacher to richer and more famous than he ever could have imagined. In the process, his wife Lois, feeling alienated and resentful of her husband's success, has filed for divorce, forcing Don to move to a house in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. With time alone to reflect, he's able to see how his new wealth and fame has affected his life in ways he never expected. Maybe the biggest of these is his new house, which is bigger and nicer than anything he's ever had in his entire life, but the longer he lives there, the more he gets the sense that it might have magical powers. But that can't be right. A house can't have magical powers, can it? Pick up Don's House in the Mountains today. You can find it at Amazon in paperback and in Kindle.
All right, we are back, and we're continuing our conversation on Angel Town here. So one of the interesting things about this one is it has a cameo of somebody. Speaking of, we were talking about John Wick earlier, from the third John Wick. Mark Dacascos has a very small role in this.
What? I didn't even see him. Where was he?
So he plays one of the gang members, and it's like kind of I want to say, I don't. So honestly, I missed it this time. So this is the kind of funny thing. I missed it in this viewing, but I caught it the first time around. And if you look in the credits, his name, I don't know, his name's spelled with a U. I'm trying to think how they spell it. But it's Mark Dacascos. It's spelled as like, so instead of, I think it's Dacuscos, or maybe it's Cus. But there's a U in there somewhere. But he plays one of the drivers for one of the guys.
Right.
So yeah, I missed it this time around, but I caught it the first time. And I tagged him on the site and all of that stuff. So it is one of those like kind of the way you'll know it, if you see it again, if you catch it again. He's one of the few gang members who speaks with a Hawaiian accent as opposed to a Mexican American accent.
Oh wow.
So yeah, it was kind of fun to see him in. I mean, again, just a very small part, just a very small thing that he has here. And then
Cool.
Peter Kwong, of course. I was trying to think of what other stuff. I think obviously what was the like totally drawing a blank here on Big Trouble in Little China, right? And the Golden
Yeah.
Child. Those are kind of his bigger ones here.
Even the Cube, I think, is probably the one I've seen most. I think that was the one I was most familiar with, although I didn't know that he was in that. But looking at his filmography, Gleaming the Cube, I was watching a lot around that time, and so that's probably the film of his that I've probably seen the most. But yeah, he's got quite a lengthy filmography. He's been around doing lots of stuff, including Albert Pune. He's worked with himself, Brain Smasher, with Dice Clay, and a whole bunch of stuff. But I'd say I'm not overly familiar with him, and but he was certainly getting reasonable work here, and he's really good in this. I thought he was very, very good as Jacques' friend Henry.
Yeah, I completely agree. And there's a few things, maybe I should have given a warning about spoiler alerts. I guess for a movie that's been out for 34 years, maybe we don't have to worry so much about spoiler alerts. But there's a couple things that they do with his character that I really appreciated. One is whenever the hero has a friend that they go to for help, and of course that was definitely a cliche element to this, that like, oh, he just happens to have a friend in LA that he grew up, without mentioning it at all in the first half of the film, suddenly he's got a friend that they can go to for help that he can sort of take as the kid gets chased around by the gang, and Gruner fights him up and is like, oh, we got to put you into hiding. I know just the person to help. And it's his buddy who runs the gym, who trains with and all that stuff. So that was kind of a funny thing there, that, oh, by the way, I've got this friend here in LA that can help us. Where was that friend when you needed a place to stay, right? But I guess Gruner didn't want to impose, unless he absolutely
That's a
had
really
to.
good point. I hadn't thought of that's a really great point. But I think they do bring up that there was he kind of basically ran off, and there was some unresolved issues between the two of them. So it's kind of like he turns up out of nowhere, but he brings the kid with him, doesn't he, when he goes to see him? And so it's almost like the kid is like a shield for him to sort of reestablish that friendship. He's kind of not heading in there sort of being, we're not here for me. I don't need help, but this kid needs help. And he's sort of like, I think I don't know if that was intentional, but I think there is an element of he would have been too proud, to go and ask his friend for help for himself. But so he definitely felt that the time had come that he needed to sort of check in with him to help this family out.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That's a really good point there. So it kind of maybe explains it a little bit better. So because to me it kind of felt like, oh, hey, by the way, you could have mentioned this
earlier, I could be projecting completely.
No, I think you might be right, because there is some talk about Gruner. I mean, and it's not completely beyond the pale with Gruner's character that he would have had a falling out with anybody either. So so there's that part of it.
Notice how aggressive he is. It's like he's saying, don't F with me. I think he says that same line like 2 or 3 times, and he's like really, he pulls out a knife and stuff at these guys. So he's clearly, they establish very early that he's not somebody to mess with. And I think he's not a whiter than white kind of character. He is kind of a bit, and they do kind of paint him that as it goes through, that he's been a bit of a darker character. He's maybe not always made the right decisions, and has let people down in the past. So he's I think I think they play it a different kind of way than what they might with a Mike Justice, sort of street justice kind of. What was that movie he did, the Justice one? Mark Singer, another cleaning up the town movie. With I'm sure he plays Mike Justice or something like that. His name's character. But anyway, it's another one of these films where the guy goes in and he's like a police officer or something. So, but where they go into the area and clean it up. And this is this does turn into a cleaning up the hood kind of movie, right, with a little bit of what came to mind when it turned into that. I was very much thinking of like Death Wish 3 and films like that with Bronson, where it kind of becomes kind of this free for all of all these gang members versus the locals, and they're trying to, they're fighting them off, and a bit of a mixture of action scenes, and Gruner then gets involved, and we have the big sort of showdowns and stuff. But yeah, it's kind of, it does turn into that sort of cleaning up the town, cleaning up the hood kind of story, whereas originally it was much more, and that that it sort of gets there gradually rather than being a thing. Because I've kind of skipped over, but we get the whole Angel goes to war kind of thing of like Angel's had enough of Jacques basically getting the better of his men, and making him, belittling him, sort of, limiting his influence and what he wants to achieve. So he just starts straight up like going after him and killing and getting his gang to assault the boy's mother and things like that. I get a bit confused about what happened with this, but I think he killed his girlfriend because she let him down, and then he puts the body in the house where Jacques' room is. But then Jacques gets the body and puts it in Angel's car. Is that right?
Yeah. So what happens is that when Jacques, so after kind of dealing with the baddies, and then you've got your montage with Gruner doing his in the gym beating up a bunch of people, but in the gym, he talks with his friend Peter Kwong about how do you know anything about, do you know anyone who would know anything about these guys? And so I recognize the actor who's playing the Chinese crime boss, the Chinatown crime boss guy, who they're like in a limo talking to this guy, and he gives them the intel on this guy Angel, who's like a bad, who's a pain, he gives them the intel on who this guy is. So Gruner decides to go to where he's living, where he's staying, and while he's in bed with his girlfriend, he sticks a knife under the guy's throat and says,
That's
"Hey, don't
right.
yes, right."
Of course he does. Yeah.
So she laughs at him, right? So
Yes.
we hear like a smack off screen, but then it turns out that he kills her for laughing at him and puts like you said, puts the body in Jacques' room, and then Jacques, right? Jacques tells his friend Henry Peter Kwong about it, but he tells Peter Kwong about it, and Kwong thinks he's like, instead of like calling the cops, like they don't call the cops, which is just kind of crazy. So he goes in to see the body, and I think he was like maybe gonna, I don't know, maybe gonna call the cops and have them take care of it or something like that, and then goes in and sees like the room's completely cleaned out, and he's like, what happened there? And then, Gruner had taken the woman's body and put it in Angel's car to scare him. So.
Which is pretty crazy, but and as if that was going to help. I mean, this film goes down all sorts of avenues with, obviously the gang that they tried to do a drive-by kind of thing, but then they actually put a bomb on his car, and there's like an explosion at the university, and things escalate really quickly in this sort of last part where they're literally sort of going at it. I mean, it doesn't get to rocket launchers and stuff like that. It doesn't go down that route. But but certainly the action, the efforts of the gang, because realistically they've got limited resources. So I actually appreciate that they don't say, oh, we've suddenly got this sort of huge amount of weaponry to use. They've basically got this one Uzi and a little bit of bomb making equipment, and that's basically all they've got. And so they're trying, because they're poor at the end of the day. They're not wealthy at what they're doing. That's why they live in this part of town and stuff. So it's all a very not authentic, but sort of more believable kind of situation that's unfolding, and for some reason they say they're very much focused on targeting this one family, but they do eventually explain that it's to do with the history of the father of the family, who was sort of standing up against the gangs historically, and that the family's presence there is kind of a constant sort of beacon against the gangs and sort of always trying to stand against them and undermine them, and that's why they're, and sort of the boys' role is to eventually sort of take that mantle. We get an earlier, when I'm jumping back in the film, but earlier when they do the first attack on the house, we get like a 5-minute, I think it's foot chase sequence. It just goes on for ages, where they're sort of running after. Now, what's the boy's name? Who goes in? Who has
Martine.
Martine. Yeah. So I mean, he's pulling out the shotgun and everything, and they chase after. I swear they chase after him for like about 5 minutes. And there's lots of like chase scenes and stuff in the film. But what did you? Oh, there's a really good. Oh, sorry, I've got it noted. There's a really cool shotgun blast at one point. I don't know if it's a cop who gets shot, but basically a really nice bit of stunt work with a pretty cool shotgun blast. But yeah, basically the way things escalate. How did you enjoy the the sort of turn from the sort of more the more dramatic part of the film to the big kind of conclusion, and adding in all those things like the explosions and things?
Oh yeah, for sure. Because I think that's what you get this build up, and like you said, you get these little moments, right? So you get like when Gruner's at the very beginning of the movie, right, when he's walking to this party, and a couple of the gang members follow him, and he pulls a knife on them, and they back off. And then like there's that whole scene where he's like at a fraternity party, that's on the street, and the gang comes by and harasses them, which just full disclosure for anybody who knows anything about Los Angeles at that time, the police would have swarmed in that area and probably arrested anybody who had a Spanish last name who was in the area. Not whether they if the kids at a rich kids at a school had called and said that Mexican immigrants or whatever were a gang, would it would have been all over, as opposed to what we get in the movie, which is like Gruner's got to fight them himself, and they're not even necessarily sure. It's funny, the people that are there aren't necessarily sure if they like the fact that Gruner beat them all up, right? Like they don't even know if they're like, they kind of appreciate it, kind of don't. But we get that sense, right? We get the kind of the slow buildup that Gruner is not someone to mess with, and you just kind of want to see him get unleashed on this gang, and we slowly get there. So I like that. I like the escalation. I like that. We've got that friend who the neighbor who is the former veteran who's paralyzed from the waist down, who we know he's going to have a part in this at some point, and we finally get him there, which was really good. And the other thing too, I would say about Peter Kwong's character, his Henry character, I don't know what you thought about this, but that character almost always dies in these movies. So he was the one I was worried about the most when we get to as this thing starts to escalate. I thought, wow, somebody's going to kill him off at some point. He's going to get stabbed in the back or shot or something, and it's going to be like, oh, tell my wife I love her, and all that stuff. Because anybody who helps the hero usually dies in a movie like this. So I was happy to see him survive.
Yeah. Yeah, there are some fatalities which we won't spoil, but yeah, he's one of the guys who does make it. What was it gonna? I was just going back to what you were saying about when during those scenes when he's fighting when he's having the small scale fights, and isn't there like a comedy moment where he gets dragged into the bushes and they're like fighting him, and he comes out and they're all still fighting because they think they're fighting him, but he sort of straightens himself out and gets off to the party while the fight is still happening without him.
Right, because there's this sense of like, how is he going to fight all of these people at once? And the other thing too, right, of course, that's where we get introduced to the veteran character, because he's sitting on the porch watching this happen, and that earns his respect, right? When he sees Gruner kind of convince them all to go into the trees, in the bushes, and then they find out that they end up fighting each other, and he kind of escapes away from them. It was, there was a sense that there was going to be more of that kind of lightheartedness, and especially because, right, we get the scene at the cemetery at the beginning, right, where the girlfriend's naked, and what am I going to do with this? We get that. That's kind of a funny scene. We get, he goes to the university, and right, we get the jerk who's the professor, the dean, or whoever he is, right, who's a complete jerk, but it's almost like a comedic jerk that he is. I mean, there's that scene where he tells this woman, oh, I had your dad, as a student in '59, and he told me he was so excited to have a boy, so he must have been so disappointed when you were born as his daughter, all that kind of stuff. There's a kind of almost like a comedic vibe to it, but this movie just takes a dark turn. And And I think if it wasn't for the action being so high quality, that tonal shift that this movie gets, I think probably would have been more of an issue.
Yeah, because it kind of does that kind of, oh, quirky, comedy on campus kind of thing of, he talks to he meets the sort of love interest who kind of tells him, oh, it seems like it's going to be a love interest, but that doesn't really go anywhere. But sort of gives him she gives him the lowdown on everyone and all this sort of stuff. A bit like the new kid in school kind of thing. But yeah, then it sort of completely deviates from that. And the tone does really change. One thing that just sort of struck me, because I was talking earlier about the opening and how I didn't really get where it was coming from, but I think there's a little bit. It's not really a theme, but there's a little bit of a thing about observing. And so we're talking about the veteran. He sits and he's observing the fight that's happening, and he's observing the stuff that's happening when the gang attack the house and stuff, and how he's literally paralyzed, so he can't get involved in the way he wants to until he sort of gathers that sort of strength and momentum that he's going to do it by any means necessary, and sort of that's his journey. And then I was thinking, the film starts off with Angel, I believe, observing this, say, gang confrontation, and I was wondering if that was sort of because the film is kind of doesn't really follow Angel's journey, but I think it's kind of a background thing of maybe that was sort of one of the first incidences of Angel trying to claim the town, because it's called Angel Town, as referencing the character of Angel, although they don't dwell on him, but that's kind of, I believe, what it's about. And he's kind of right because his car's got Angel on it, so you know it's him. And I think he observes this gang confrontation, and that's the point where he decides that he's going to claim this town. I might be wrong. And then that's kind of what he's trying to do. And, as the story unfolds, of him taking that action. What do you think about that kind of interpretation?
I never considered that, because I know, obviously, like you said, the character's name is Angel, right? And he's trying to run the town. But the other thing, right, of course, that's Los Angeles is the city of angels, right? It's
City of Angels,
it's Angel Town as well. So it's kind of like that double play on it, right? That it's the character of Angel is trying to take over. But you're right. It's like this sense of like, oh, well, he's got an Uzi now, when the rest of these gang members at best have a pistol, but for the most part have knives and bats and things like that. That like he suddenly.
I was wondering if he got that gun from that opening scene. I'd have to go back and check it.
No, I think he had it on him.
He had it already. Okay.
And because remember that's when they start shooting at because they when the Mexican gang gets into a fight with the African American gang, and then he just starts shooting them with kind of even the odds.
Right.
Or no, actually, is it him or is it somebody else who starts shooting? I can't remember. I think it was somebody else.
I thought it was someone else, but
that's right. It was a white guy actually that was who was like I kind of wondered, because it seemed like there was a lot going on in that movie that was kind of a Chekhov's thing that they never really fully went through. I almost wonder if that movie was like from another scene was from another movie, except that it had the character of Angel in it, right? Because it felt like there was like more going on there that we don't, because like what that white guy was doing there shooting everybody made no sense too. So I mean, it might have just been that they just they had trouble finding extras, and they just whoever they could get to be in the scene.
I'd be really interested to go back and watch that not necessarily the full opening, because it's a bit long.
Yes,
but but just sort of checking out those little bits, because I think they're trying to establish something there, which then I think the film doesn't capitalize on it, or not capitalize, but doesn't develop it early enough, so you kind of move away from it. It's kind of becomes just it was just the credits, and you don't think about what was actually happening in that scene, and it just, as soon as it gets to Gruner, it's like that's when the film's actually starting. Whereas I think there's something going on with that opening scene that was intended to sort of lay more groundwork for what was not just it's a place where there's gangs, but to show something about the character. I'm pretty sure it's Angel in the start.
Oh, it is. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because and I thought was happening there. I don't know if you thought the same thing. That I thought maybe they were going to set up a Yojimbo paradigm where you've got the Mexican gang and the African American gang who are at odds with each other, and then you insert Gruner into the mix in this sort of like almost like Old West kind of town kind of way, and
Yeah.
maybe he's going to pit the two of them against each other. But the closest thing they ever come to that is when Martini's being chased by the gang and Gruner's helping him. They run into the turf of the African American gang,
Yeah.
and when when Angel and his crew chase them into that turf, they get chased away, and the African American gang is kind of the head of that gang is kind of like he respects Gruner for running into their territory.
Yeah. Anyone who's an enemy of them is like all right by him, so he's not gonna go on, because they're like, should we go and get him? And he's like, no, they're messing with the other guys, so I'm happy with that. But that's kind of as much as you get from them, isn't it?
Yeah, right. I think it was a concept that they tried. They maybe had bigger plans for that they just never fleshed out. Kind of similar to the girlfriend aspect, right? That because it's not like Gruner has a relationship with Teresa Saldana, and he doesn't have one with this woman, right? He goes on one. He essentially he walks her home to where the frat party is, and
That's a fight scene.
The fight scene happens, and then he impresses her in that scene like you were talking about, where he's in class and he's daydreaming, and then the professor asks him to figure out what's wrong with this equation, and he bangs it out really quickly and upsets the dean who's sitting there being a jerk. She's like turned on by it. Of course, we also get kind of the racist line there, right, where somebody calls him a frog, and he grabs the guy by the tie and calls that guy a raghead, which of course is a slur for people of Arab descent. And I think you could make the point that if he was like growing up on the streets of Paris, that he might have had run-ins with maybe like Tunisian or Algerian immigrants, and that he might have felt it was okay to say that kind of stuff. But in the movie, it kind of has this false equivalency that like making fun of French people, calling them frogs, is the same as sort of these more racist terms here, which is I don't know how you feel. Like for me, I'm of French descent, and if somebody wants to call me a frog, I'm not all that concerned with it. It's not the same thing as if somebody was really using a really loaded racist term, as opposed to calling it somebody of European descent, whatever terms that Europeans use to kind of take the piss out of each other.
Yeah, I think it's a casual racism thing to a degree, but I also think this is the character is saying that like you say, it's a tit for tat kind of thing. He's saying that because of the frog thing, I think, but because of the time, they would have, he wouldn't have had any compunction about using such an expression in the same way that a character might, throw say something, a common homophobic slur that was used throughout the 1980s and stuff, very casually. I think it's that kind of moment, so it's it is what it is. It's unfortunate in retrospect, but I don't think the character is meant to be. I mean, they, like I've said, they've painted him very delicately as a character who's a bit edgy, or a bit of a got a bit of a dark side. So for moments like that are a bit disconcerting, because he comes across as such a nice guy. But I think that's kind of the point. They were playing with that to a degree of like, he seems like this very, he's very polite and very presentable, and he's very, he's good to the family and all that sort of stuff. But there's little moments like where he's just like, he seems like he's going to snap. He's pulling out a knife, or he's very defensive about people not messing with him. And I think, in another film, they would have delved in more into his psychology and stuff. But I think that's kind of all you're going to get with this. But, it's kind of, the fact that he leads to these, escalating situations. And this is where the stuff with his friend comes in, and basically saying you've abandoned people and you've abandoned things in the past. And he does disappear. And then there's that moment at the end where, a stick of dynamite is sort of being thrown, and they're going to go and grab it, and all of a sudden he's that, it's that sort of hero shot of, they show his feet and sort of pan up to show that he's returned, and to do the right thing, so he hasn't just sort of thrown, he hasn't just sort of lit the fuse, he's there to put out the fire as well. So I think there's sufficient stuff done with his character that sort of justifies some of more incongruous moments. But yeah, it is a film that's a little bit all over the place with the character. To just suddenly sort of throw in, oh yeah, he's a world kickbox champion. He's been traveling all around the world and all that. It doesn't seem to quite fit with what they were originally trying to present. But that's in terms of films like this, that's three-dimensional character building, I guess.
Right, exactly. Well, right, because that's the thing, right? Is that again, the trivia says that this was originally meant for Van Damme. I mean, I can't imagine it would have been that different for Van Damme, but you do
No,
wonder if, yeah, it's like you wonder if they maybe it was originally supposed to be for somebody else, and then let's make it for Van Damme, so they make all these changes to try to make get Van Damme involved. He doesn't want to do it, or it doesn't, for whatever reason, it doesn't happen with him. And then, this poor man's Van Damme, so to speak, right, is here in LA doing screen tests. He's perfect for what we've got going on here. And so, yeah, you never know with these kinds of things, right? You never know. It's part of the fun, I guess, of the DTV world, right? And this one technically wasn't, like you said, it technically wasn't. It got a limited release. It made about 800 grand, which 800 grand isn't bad for 1990. I don't know what the budget was. I don't think it said what the budget was on IMDb, but at the very least, it wasn't the worst. But yeah, it's always kind of fun to figure out how these things ended up where they ended up.
Yeah, absolutely. It does look like actually it had because I'm just looking up here. It does look like it was a theatrical release here in the UK as well. So that. In different times, we wouldn't see that sort of thing generally happening these days with a film with a budget of this level. But yeah, back in the day, Olivier Gruner was in his debut film was a theatrically released movie. Before he sort of became sort of more familiar with DTV. But this is certainly a film that would have had its built its reputation in video stores, and yeah, it'd be interesting to. I've never come across any sort of documentaries or anything about it because it's just not one of those films that people talk about a lot. But it would be interesting to sort of delve into the history of it and maybe find some little background about how it was developed. I think very much that it was probably always intended as a Van Damme movie. Unless there was an older version of the script that was, something they would have intended to do with, any sort of non-martial arts sort of actor at the time, following that sort of, not Charles Bronson, because they wouldn't have wanted somebody that old, but you know what I'm saying, following that more familiar kind of format, not add in the martial arts, and they probably could have taken this film and rejigged it. But it wouldn't have surprised me if Van Damme had made this, because in every other aspect, I mean, you even look at some of Van Damme's recent films, like We Die Young.
Yeah,
We Die Young has quite a few things in common with Angel Town, in terms of having a character who's befriends somebody who's in the danger, targeted by a gang, and he's like, they want him to be part of this gang, and he's kind of torn between these worlds because he wants to be like the good kid and stuff. And the boy in this, there's an interesting exchange, again going back to Jacques' character and stuff. There's an exchange with is it Martin? Yeah, sorry. Between Jacques and Martin, and saying he wants him to be part. Martin was saying, "Oh, they want me to be part of their gang," and Jacques is like, almost the way I accepted the scene when it was. It seemed like he was like, "Well, why aren't you part of the gang?
right.
You should, it's almost like why you're not part of the gang. It's like are you what reason have you got not to be part of the gang?" And rather than, "Oh yeah, you should stay away from the gang," it seemed like almost like he was not encouraging him, but saying, like, looking down on him, but
Right.
not doing that. That's how it played to me. It was almost like you're not going, you're not doing what you should be doing. again, I would say I might be reading into that, but and it might be just the way the scene played, or Gruner's delivery of the dialogue could have put it in a different context for me. But that's the way I was experiencing it, and yeah. So I think the Van Damme. This is probably one of the films that's closest to Van Damme, say, because it's got that background and thing, and it came out around the same time as Lionheart, or AWOL as it was here in the UK. But these were the films that Imperial were doing, and sort of yeah, it's kind of would probably be considered probably one of some of the high watermarks of their time. I think Angel Town, despite its low budget, say it clearly did it clearly caught enough interest to have the support of a theatrical release, even in the UK, which is quite unusual for a film of this type. And yeah, I can't believe it's taken me this long to actually get around to seeing it, because it's one I was very much familiar with in terms of knowing the name and the title. Like I said, real oversight, one of the biggest oversights, I think, and I very much enjoyed it. It was really interesting going back to see the start of Gruner's career. I mean, he didn't make another film for like a couple of years after this. I don't know why that is, but he was. It was a little bit of a gap before what I consider his peak period. So whether you say the film, would you say it got 800,000?
You made about 800,000. Yeah. And, I think going back to like what you talked about with that, I wonder, because if you look at the way his projects kind of are released, right, where it's like Nemesis comes out in 92, Automatic and Savat come out in 95, Savage and Mercenary come out in 96. I wonder if any of his projects got held up.
Yeah.
One thing about Pyun, I love him. Always a fan of his stuff, but he was someone who, his project would run into delays, right? They didn't always come out at the times he was expecting. Automatic sounds like it could be another one like that. I mean, Savat with Isaac Florentine, same thing. Like you could see where projects might have been held up on those ends. But you're right that Angel Town is good enough, and like you said, it had the theatrical release, and I think Gruner had enough of an it factor that you'd be wanting to see him kind of bang out as much stuff as possible. But it's also possible, now that you're talking about this, that those delays in those projects might have been enough to kind of hurt him from going that next level. Because as we were talking about it, he starts in 1990. That's his first film. The wave is already starting to crest on this whole action thing as we get into like 96, 97. And so by the time he's kind of getting things off the ground, a similar thing you could see is with Don the Dragon Wilson, that he kind of gets moving with the Blood Fist movies and the Ring of Fire movies. Next thing you know, it's the late 90s, and this whole thing is falling apart on us. It's kind of the waves cresting and receding on those things. And at least Wilson had a little bit more of a head start and had more of a thing going there with Corman, where Corman was really pumping out those movies for him. It sounds like Gruner, that might have been what happened with Gruner, and that might have been why he didn't quite take off the way he was meant to.
Yeah, and I think it could be we got so many films that in that sort of 95 to 96 period, possibly because of that, and that's why he ended up having such an impact at that time. It was kind of, he was coming in. He was just reaching his peak at the time, just before everything was going to change. And say it took a little bit longer, but I think for whatever reason, the slow pace. He didn't. It wasn't like he was again going back to what I was saying before. He came in. This is a starring role. All his other roles were starring roles. He was never even in those sort of quieter periods. He was never in the back. He was never like a supporting player or background player. That would all come later. They were always putting him front and center. So project delays and possible, possibly projects falling apart is probably a likely explanation for why, that what happened with those gaps.
And I wonder if, like you said, where he's getting the starring roles right off the bat, if that makes him, because you think about, like, again, we were talking about Don the Dragon Wilson. We talked about Cynthia Rothrock. We talked about Gary Daniels. I mean, yeah, Gary Daniels had a couple starring movies right off the bat, right? He had Final Reprisal and King of Mahi's Secret of King Mahi's Island. But really, if you look at his PM stuff, I mean, how many movies in PM was he playing second fiddle to people like Chad McQueen, or Ian Jacklin before he gets, Recoil and Rage and Riot and those really big ones. So, he was more used to being second fiddle. So that when things started to kind of drop a bit there, he was a little bit more okay with it. I think, I mean, it's interesting because Bernhardt's kind of a similar one, right? Bernhardt is like the star of his movies when he first starts out. He's a little bit later than Gruner. I guess that's the interesting thing, right? Is he kind of comes. I didn't realize this, but his first movie, Bloodsport 2, is '96. So he's a little bit after everybody else when he starts doing these movies. So maybe that's another piece of it, that like he might have been the star of the movies, but he wasn't the star of like an Angel Town that's going to be in theaters and that kind of thing. So I wonder if for Gruner, it was a tougher pill to swallow than it was for some of these other names like Wilson, Rothrock, and Daniels, who weren't stars right off the bat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because again, we think about. I mean, I guess the thing with the other thing about Bernhardt, right, is that he gets the Mortal Kombat TV series along with
Yes.
the Bloodsport movies, but it's not long, '03. So he starts in '90. His first movie is '96. By '03, he's already into '03. He's already into the Matrix movie, and
Yeah, yeah.
so. And I think that's a big thing for someone like him to be like, oh, it's a big production and I'm going to have a smaller part in it and just do stunt work in it. It, I think for him only maybe having a small amount of movies under his belt, and they weren't really great movies, to be like, oh, I get to be a part of the Matrix, is probably a bigger deal for him. I mean, I wonder if Gruner had those opportunities, if he would have gone for them, because you look at the movies that the Bernhardt has done. I mean, yes, he's got the stinkers like like Santa's Summer House, but he's in Parker, he's in the Hunger Games movies, in the John Wick movies. He's doing Marvel movies, those kinds of things. So
Yeah.
Gruner never got any of that stuff, right? He's not getting any of that kind of thing. He's not being mentioned for the Expendables movie. He's not doing any any of that kind of thing. He's doing his kind of his big thing is like Showdown in Manila, doing a sequence at the end of Showdown in Manila with Rothrock and Wilson that's directed by Mark Dacascos. But even then, it's like a very small thing that he's doing there.
Yeah.
That's it. Very, very interesting. But like you said, I think this movie was a great reminder for us of kind of like where Gruner was and kind of what his career was in that early '90s period.
Yeah, and what the state of what would become, the sort of standard DTV action, where things were at that time. Low budget, medium budget, independently made, American action films that were not, the Shahs were kind of sort of treading that line in, a lot, like say a lot of the other filmmakers at the time, Canon before them and New Image and stuff after them. This was a period where you could be making films that would be, yes, their primary home was the video store, but they would still manage to sort of get those mainstream theatrical releases. I know in North America there's like a lot of a lot of the VOD releases. They'd say the in theaters now, or limited runs in theaters, which doesn't happen over here. We don't do that very often. It is, well, there's a little bit of it, but certainly not to the extent of North America. It's much more of a thing for DTV films to actually get a little bit of cinema exposure, but still that's primarily what they are. But back then, Angel Town and Lionheart and stuff, and all these films that were made with Van Damme or in the mold of Van Damme, they weren't the Beekeeper, they weren't these massive budget or productions, and they it was an interesting time that I think was much more open and available to because budgets were not sort of the budgets haven't gone crazy by that point, so it was a much more level playing field, whether you were Warner Brothers with your Steven Seagal movie, or you're the Shahs with one of your Gruner or Van Damme films. So yeah, really interesting time, 1990 and 1991. I class the sort of 90 to 92 period as some of my most formative years in terms of action movies and stuff. But yeah, it was really kind of fully formed by 95, and so I think that's why I love those the Gruner films from kind of this period and that period, that time, why they mean so much to me, because I think it was just a really, really great period, some really good solid stories, good budgets, and it's a bit of a time capsule kind of thing to sort of look back at how things were, and I think it was good. I enjoyed it. It was something. It didn't let me down. I would preferred it if it was shorter, but I think there's a lot. I think there's a lot to get involved in, and as our discussion today, we certainly found enough to talk about with it, which I wasn't sure going in, of a film that's so on the surface so standardly conventional. Does it have any nuances and stuff that you can delve into? And I think it does.
Yeah, I think it's a great point that you make there, that there's like that combination of like some of those nuances with the story plus the really great action. And like you said, when it starts to ramp up, it really goes, and you get these really great like sort of fight sequences. And Gruner, of course, is really great at anchoring those. So yeah, you make a really great point there. And I think you also make a great point about sort of that, thinking about that time to go see movies, because it's like, movies that came out, like you said, in that early 90s period, if you went to the video store in the mid to late 90s, those movies would still be there, and you'd still kind of have them and have fun with them. But also, like you said, here in the States, with cable TV taking off, it was like they were all looking for content, and an Angel Town or Automatic or something like that, those would get picked up for cable channels as well, and that's kind of where the money was. Which was always an interesting part of it. I'll say one quick thing about the theatrical thing. Movie Cinderella's Revenge that Tom Jolliffe wrote, that was produced by Mark L. Lester, that played here out in the suburbs. So it was quite a trip. I had to take a 30-minute subway trip and then a 55-minute bus ride to get to where the theater was out in the suburbs. But they were showing the movie, and it was in amongst Ghostbuster, and there's trailers for the Fall Guy and the new Crow movie and things like that. They're being shown with it, so it was a really fun experience there. And it would be nice, I think, for more of that to happen in the UK as well.
Yeah, it's very, very. As I say, there's not a lot of it. It's very, very rare, especially anything sort of core DTV. Like say. Like Jesse Johnson films, for example, I'd be more likely to see. I feel like it would be more likely to see in limited theatres or whatever associated to one of his films than we'd ever see it over here. It just wouldn't play generally in a cinema. But the you guys are lucky in that sense. You get these sort of special opportunities to to see these films as and when you can, if you have to make a really long journey, unfortunately.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, I mean, most Americans have cars, so I'm in the minority of Americans that we don't drive, don't have cars. But so in Philadelphia, really, if it's in Philadelphia, it's very easy for me to get to. But once you start getting out in the suburbs, that the whole calculus changes there. But definitely it was a fun time to be able to kind of do it and be able to see it for sure. And movies like this kind of bring you back to that.
Like that myself, because I don't drive either, so I've
Right.
done long trips to try and see something. I might have to venture into London or somewhere, but every now and again you see something that's got a limited. I see a lot of there might be Indian action films, for example,
Oh yeah.
that would typically, they're much more accessible now on things like Netflix. But if one's showing in the cinema, I will try and get to it, and I will journey if I can to try and catch it. If I'm really keen, because it's such a great opportunity to see some of these things when they've got this limited sort of theatrical window. It's slightly different with in the Indian films, because where they're showing, they've generally got much bigger audiences to see them than some of the low budget. But every now and again there's something like, I remember, this goes back to what we were talking about, that transitional period when action was kind of changing, and Jean-Claude Van Damme, who I'm going to reference here, was things were changing, and he was moving towards his DTV part of his career. So Universal Soldier: The Return came out.
Oh yeah.
And it was a cinema release, but it wasn't playing many places. I had to really trek. I think I got my dad to take me to go and see it. I had to basically travel, drive for a good hour to find the cinema that was showing it. And it was only a small screen as well, so it wasn't one of the big theaters or anything. But that's probably kind of an equivalent thing of the sort of limited, the way things were becoming a bit more limited with the interest, like Knockoff and Double Team. I think they both had cinema releases, but they were very sort of low key ones, and these were bigger budget movies. It had around a decent budget. Universal Soldier, tighter budget, but something like some of the more recent Van Damme films, we would just never see those in a cinema here. And some of those I wouldn't want to go, and I wouldn't make the effort, but because they've been a bit ropey. But I'm if Olivier Gruner was in a movie and it was appearing in a cinema, or Van Damme's in a movie now at the cinema, where they're stars, I probably would go and see them. It would be a treat. But unless it's like a film festival or something special like that, it's generally not going to happen. But that's so that's cool that you got a chance to see Cinderella's Revenge. I say, I don't think that would happen or will happen over here. I think that's kind of quite a special thing.
Yeah, well, it was kind of an interesting thing, talking with Tom Joliffe about it, because it was like, I've seen his name on the big screen, you know what I mean? But I guess like maybe if a movie that he does has a premiere, maybe, that's one way he could see it. But it was kind of I kind of felt bad in that sense that he hasn't, he hadn't seen it, hasn't seen his name up there like that. But like for me to see his name and be like, oh wow, that's, I know that name, I know who that person is. Yeah, it was really cool. You mentioned about the Van Damme thing. The last one that I saw in the theater of his was Double Team in '97. So
Cool.
it's you make a great point about that kind of thing, that like in Angel Town, it was still 1990 was still early enough that a movie like that would still want to have a theatrical release and see if it maybe could catch it lightning in a bottle or something like that before it went strictly to the DTV, to the video store and to cable. And nowadays, like you said, it's an Angel Town would have a much lower budget. It would have probably been about 80 minutes, which of course I think we would have preferred a shorter runtime, but it would have been, a quicker budget, quicker thing. You probably wouldn't have Teresa Saldana or a name like that in the movie. And there would have been no thought about a theatrical release, right? It would have been, let's get it right on Tubi and see what we can get for it. Maybe have it rent for first, like, I guess that's the deal, right? You do a rental on Amazon first, and then after it's been out long enough, you put it on the free streamers. And so it is kind of nice, having a movie like this where Imperial thought they were going to make a good amount of money off of it. And, 800 grams is nothing to sneeze at, because I think it was enough for them. They made enough in the States to decide they're going to have it released in England. So it again, kind of like you said, brings you back to a different time when movies were made in a different way than they are today.
Yeah, and just another one I want to mention in the same vein of coming into this period of somebody who came out of nowhere is Jeff Speakman's The Perfect Weapon.
Oh right,
which was the next year. Now that one was made because that was backed by Paramount, and that was had a bit of a more high profile cinema release. That one didn't get a UK, so that was straight to video here in the UK. But I wouldn't have been, it could have gone either way. I think, that I don't think that sort of says anything about, why Angel Town was a cinema release Perfect Weapon. I think it's just circumstances, maybe, was all that happened there. But, especially with someone like a company like Paramount, they probably was like, once it didn't do that well in the States, they just sort of, took it off the market. It wasn't even they weren't even going to bother trying to put it in cinemas a lot of places probably, whereas something that didn't have the big studio sort of instincts, if just saying oh, how things just don't perform. The Fall Guy recently, a good example. So the Fall Guy didn't perform as well as they were expecting. They kind of just go, okay, we're going to shrink back now. We're gonna just put it straight out onto, as soon as possible. We're going to make it a home premiere and see if we can make money from the home, environment before eventually, obviously, doing the standard VOD and SVOD and all that sort of thing. But something like, say the Perfect Weapon, if it was made by Imperial, I don't think they would have held that back, and I think they would have still tried to give it a lease of life, because like these, say, some of these recent ones, it's that theatrical exposure that gives it that marketing boost, to then have it appear in the video stores of, it was something that played theatrical. There is a certain level of awareness of it, whereas something else might be, if it bypassed cinemas entirely, it would do all right. Angel Town would have been absolutely fine had it never played in a cinema. But I think it says something interesting about the time that that it was a film that could potentially make money, and probably did make money in the cinema before they did that. It wasn't just a pure marketing exercise of just saying it was a cinema release just for a couple of days. It was something that had the potential, because it was a different time, and say Van Damme and stuff were huge, and the films, Angel Town probably had the same budget or a very similar budget to what Van Damme's films were at that time, Bloodsport and Kickboxer and stuff. So this is predating Time Cop and all that sort of stuff, which is another, again, the parallel that was happening with Gruner, because I think Gruner started to do so many sci-fi films because that's what Van Damme was doing, so that's what he was being cast in. The sci-fi thing was really big, so Van Damme was doing like Time Cop, and so what was the other? He did another sci-fi one, didn't he?
Yeah, well, so Cyborg, right now.
Yeah,
of course, that was earlier.
Well, Cyborg and Nemesis, obviously both Pune, and then I think Gruner got they were trying to do the, Van Damme is like the martial arts, but then they also want the sci-fi, so they tried to copy that model, with Gruner in a sort of a more limited, limited in one sense. I mean, something like Savage looks so much bigger budget than something like Cyborg, but that's just an interesting. Cyborg is a curious one anyway, because you would have thought Van Damme would have been in bigger budget stuff by that point, but he wasn't quite there. I think that's what's interesting when you go back to something like Cyborg. You just realize how low budget it would. It was. There were some leaps to be made yet with what he was doing. But yeah, some interesting parallels. And I think I really like Van Damme, but to a degree, I liked at that time. I think I like Gruner more. I certainly I do have much more affection, I think, for that period of Gruner's output. Whereas I think with Van Damme, I got into him a bit later. So I wasn't really a Bloodsport Kickboxer guy. I was a knockoff Double Team guy. It's like I wasn't even that fussed about Universal Soldier, but it was kind of the crazy stuff that Van Damme was making in the sort of late 90s was what was really grabbing my attention. I kind of got into him later, and that's why again I love films like Universal Soldier: The Return so much. But so sorry, I've waffled on there a bit.
No. You make a great point on all, because it is an interesting thing. Like, because Cyborg, I mean, that was one that Pyun did not have a great experience doing Cyborg with Van Damme. But I think from Van Damme's standpoint, right, Bloodsport is big, right? It becomes huge in the late 80s. And I think that's when he started to see his star rise to that point that he could be pushy on Cyborg and get Golden Globus behind him to like push for reshoots and things like that. And then, Kickboxer Lionheart. And it's like, I think from Imperial standpoint, probably by the time Lionheart was out and he was so big, they knew they lost him, right? They weren't going to be able to keep him. And so
Yeah.
Gruner was going to be their guy. And I think it is an interesting thing to kind of, like you said, like those early 90s Gruner flicks were also, they're a lot of fun. And it is an interesting thing when you kind of do that parallel between where Van Damme was at that time. And yeah, Hard Target, I think, is just a fantastic, movie of his. But as you kind of get in that mid 90s period, there are these big budget things that kind of don't all do as well. I mean, Street Fighter, right? We talk about that one. That's kind of a dud. Sudden Death, I like it for the hockey element, but I mean, Ty from Crumpets and I, we were talking about the fight scene he has with a sports mascot in the penguin suit. So I totally get what you're saying. Yeah, I get exactly what you're saying. That like, okay, Van Damme is punching people in penguin suits and doing the kind of the mess of a movie that was a Street Fighter film at the same time that Olivier Gruner is doing Automatic and Savant and Savage. So I can totally see what you're saying about that. That like, at that time, yeah, Gruner's stuff was a little bit better than what Van Damme was doing in that mid 90s period.
Yeah, and the other thing is, even though Van Damme wasn't really that associated with science fiction, it would actually become something he would do a lot more, say the Universal Soldier and stuff, but the Replicant and stuff like that, he would do a bit more of it, but it would come a bit later. But yeah, Van Damme's run, say he's got it took him, I think it was like probably around Universal Soldier where the budget sort of started to get bigger, but even then he was sharing responsibilities with Dolph, and it wasn't until, say, I think Time Cop was like the big leap upwards in '94, and that's kind of, say, it does sort of tie in. And the same year he did Street Fighter, which was also very fantastical. Yeah, so no, it's been really interesting to sort of think about this stuff a bit more than or sort of take the sort of trip back and see this film that I'd always wanted to see and just kind of forgot about, and then a chance to revisit and sort of awaken memories of the time, and sort of thinking about these parallels with these action guys that I just sort of absorbed at the time, but didn't really think about the connections and stuff. And I think that's something I've really enjoyed about watching this film and talking about it with you today, is to sort of think about the film and its place and Gruner's place in the in that, well, in action cinema, action movies in general, but especially this particular period where I think he shined brightest.
Yeah, I agree completely, and I think I agree with you too. It was kind of fun. This was a fun one to pick. I was trying to figure out, because based on what's available to get, and this one came up, and I was like, okay, this could be a good one because of that, and so it worked in that sense that we were able to have a good conversation about the jumping off and yeah, kind of how his career kind of went, kind of how he kind of flew out of the gates with these first 5 or 6 movies of his, and then kind of fell back as the whole market was kind of falling back as well. So yeah. So I really enjoyed the conversation as well. Well, I guess Rich, as we're wrapping up, is there anything that you'd like to plug?
Well, if anybody's interested to hear more of the kind of stuff that DTV stuff that my colleagues and I talk about at the DTV Digest, please go and check out our podcast run by my good friend Mike, and we discuss new releases primarily, but we've also got a what we call the throwback segment where we pick something that was from a few years ago or from many years ago. Something like Angel Town would be the kind of thing that we would cover in that section. One of our most recent episodes, we covered Samurai Cop, which is a film that was never actually, as far as I'm aware, never actually released in the UK. it was the sequel is available on VOD, but I've not been able to find the original apart from like a riff tracks version. And I found it on YouTube, which unfortunately, when you get some YouTube really films that you find on YouTube, they are edited for YouTube, so there's certain sequences missing. But it was a compromise that had to be made in pursuit of this to catch up with that film, which was in. So there, you can't get a more pure sort of not early 90s sort of B movie action experience than something like that. So yeah, films like that. Check us out, DTV Digest. We're on, in all the usual places, Audible and Amazon and stuff like that. But also we've got a social media presence, so you can find us on Facebook and on X, and we try and publish. We try and do an episode, a couple of times, 2 or 3 times a month. We try for weekly, but it's usually say 2 or 3 episodes a month. If something's coming out and you're interested to get some thoughts on it before you potentially check it out, that's what we're there for. I mean, a lot of the films that we cover are not films that are being heavily discussed, so we try to give them that opportunity. It's have like a proper roundtable discussion of a new film that's probably, in many cases they're these days digital only releases, or maybe something might be a streaming release, or it could be VOD, but very, very rarely a DVD release. One of the higher profile ones we talked about lately is Chief of Station, which I mentioned earlier. So that's quite a cool one to talk about. And we recorded we haven't recorded as of this point. We haven't recorded the review yet because the release is in question in the UK of whether it's actually going to get a DVD release or not, I believe. So it was one that seemed like it was all lined up for a DVD as well as digital release. I think that's going to change. I think it's probably going to get either VOD, or it might even be that the current planned release gets changed and it gets sold to a streaming service or something. Sorry, I'm speculating at this point because I'm just curious what's going to happen to it. But so films like that, if you want to hear what our opinions are, go check us out.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think one of the things I love about your show as well, because you guys are in England, so you kind of give us a sense of what's coming out in the UK, and it's always fascinating because I think the one time I was a guest on your show, there's a film that was out in the UK but not here yet. I think it might have been Take Back.
With Michael Jai White.
Michael Jai White. I think that was the one. But it's interesting how that happens. Like there's some movies that you guys get first and we have to wait for. And sometimes it's the other way around, right? Sometimes it's ones that we've had for months and you guys are waiting on. So I always like hearing what you guys have to say about these new movies. But it's also kind of funny how it's like it'll be a movie that I've seen it like months ago and it finally got to the UK. So I'm finally hearing what you guys think about it. Whereas other times, sometimes it's like, if I know this movie's coming out, I might wait to listen to your episode because I might wait till I've seen it first to see what you guys think about it.
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, yeah. Well, thanks again, Rich, for coming on. This was a great conversation. I think it was good to finally give Gruner his due on the. I mean, we're doing this podcast for a long time now. This is going to be, I don't know what number episode we're at this point, but it's in the 160s. For us to be this far along and not have really covered Gruner yet, I think was kind of a misstep on my part. But I'm glad we were able to kind of give him his due.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I think it took us a while on DTV Digest. I think I put forward Savage as one of our throwback films to discuss. So that it took a while because he's one of those guys we know about him, but we don't. He doesn't often come up in the conversation. But I think this was sort of something that was overdue for both of us to sort of get this out and really sort of sell, or try to tell people, if they haven't seen any of his stuff, to sort of you can go check it out. And I would definitely say you should really try and see Savage. You might not like it, you might not like what it goes for, but I'd be really interested to hear or read on your blog what your thoughts are on Savage.
Yeah, like you said, how this one was kind of a gap in your viewing. Like Savage is definitely one of those gaps for mine that I've got to rectify soon for sure. And I haven't reviewed a Gruner film in a while, so it'll give me an excuse to get more Gruner on the site. So I think we've got 24 films of his on the site. So he's not quite in the 30 club yet. So that's probably, Hall of Famers, you want to try. I would like to try to get them 30 tags. So yeah, the Savage is definitely one that I probably definitely need to cover for sure.
Awesome.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you again, Rich, for coming on. This was a really fun conversation. And thank you, everybody, for listening. And yeah, we'll be back soon. Bye, everyone. All right.